The birthday card trembles in Everett's weathered hands, its cheerful 70 today mocking the dread pooling in his stomach. Seated in his favorite armchair, the one Tracy always says makes the living room look dated, he traces the signatures, lingering on Brent's too elaborate scrawl. Afternoon sunlight filters through lace curtains, casting patterns across the hardwood floor where it happened last month. The faint scent of Tracy's lavender cleaner can't mask something sour beneath. Everett's throat tightens as he notices the small X in the corner, their signal, another accident planned for tonight's party. Has someone you trusted ever made you feel this sense of dread? Share your story below, like if this feeling resonates with you. Follow to see if Everett finds the strength to break free. A tear splashes onto the card, blurring the ink. He should call someone, but who would believe him over Tracy's practiced concern, her convincing explanations? His fingers reach for the phone, then withdraw. Not yet. First, evidence. Everett adjusted his tie in the bedroom mirror, noticing the slight tremor in his hands had worsened since finding the birthday card with Brent's too elaborate signature and that small X in the corner. 70 years old today, and his body betrayed him with these trembles just when he needed steadiness most. The weight of the card in his pocket pressed against his chest like a stone as he carefully arranged family photos on the mantel. The one of Daniel at graduation, before Tracy had convinced him his father was unstable. The fishing trip where 3 generations of Collins men had stood proudly with their catch. The Christmas when Eleanor had still been fully herself, before the convenient diagnosis of dementia whenever she said something Tracy didn't like. "Those dusty old frames make the room look dated," Tracy said from the doorway, her smile not reaching her eyes. "We should put them away before guests arrive." They stay. His voice came out firmer than he expected. Small victories. Through the window, he spotted Brent's luxury car pulling into the driveway first, always watching. The gift box in Brent's hand was suspiciously small for a 70th birthday. Everett's stomach tightened, remembering last month's accident on the stairs after Brent had insisted on helping him down. The bruises had just faded, but the memory of Tracy's performance of concern for the neighbors remained sharp. The doorbell chimed. "Here we go, old man. Keep your eyes open." He straightened his shoulders, practiced smile in place as guests filtered in with birthday wishes. Each handshake, each embrace felt like a performance as he searched faces for potential allies, finding none. Eleanor sat in her designated corner chair, surprisingly alert today. Her eyes followed Tracy and Brent as they moved through the room, her gnarled fingers working invisible knitting needles, a habit when she was anxious. When their eyes met across the room, her slight headshake went unnoticed by others. "You've outdone yourself, Tracy," someone gushed, admiring the elaborate spread. "Such a loving wife." Tracy's fingers dug into Everett's arm while she smiled. "After 42 years, I know just what my husband deserves." The grandfather clock ticked with unusual loudness as more guests arrived. The hardwood floors gleamed dangerously under fresh wax. Familiar chairs had been rearranged, creating an impromptu stage area. His favorite armchair, the one Tracy always threatened to donate, had been pushed against the wall, marginalized like its owner. Relief washed through him when Jamie arrived, apologizing for her hospital shift running late. Her paramedic uniform partly hidden under a casual jacket, but her observant eyes missed nothing as she kissed his cheek. "Happy birthday, Uncle Everett. How are you feeling today?" "Never better," he lied, catching Tracy and Brent exchanging glances in the decorative mirror. As the room filled with conversation and laughter, Everett felt increasingly cornered. The cake's candles waited unlit. The crystal glasses caught afternoon light in prismatic patterns. Background music played slightly too loud, making conversation strained. Then Brent's hand gripped his shoulder, too firmly to be friendly. "Hey everyone! The birthday boy should show us that dance move from his youth. Remember that one, Ev? Everett felt himself being positioned near the center of the room, Brent's hand at his back, exactly between his shoulder blades, the precise spot where it had happened last month. As guests turned expectantly, he caught Jamie's eye across the room, a silent plea as he felt his balance compromised. Brent's voice dropped to a whisper. "Don't disappoint your guests, old man." And Everett knew with terrible certainty that this was no accident about to happen. The world tilted beneath Everett's feet. One moment he stood surrounded by birthday guests, the next he was crashing onto the hardwood floor, a precise shove between his shoulder blades, sending him down at exactly the wrong angle. The impact reverberated through his spine with sickening familiarity. Cold. That was his first coherent thought. Cold hardwood against his cheek as numbness spread downward from his neck like water filling a vessel. He tried to call out, to move his arms, but nothing responded. Only his eyes remained under his control, wide with terror as laughter erupted around him. "Oh, Everett!" Tracy's theatrical concern floated above him. "Stop playing around now. You're embarrassing yourself." More laughter. From his floor-level perspective, Everett saw dust bunnies under the sofa contradicting Tracy's cleaning obsession, wine spilling across cream carpet like blood, the ceiling fan spinning in lazy circles above him. Someone's shoe nearly stepped on his outstretched fingers, fingers he could see but not feel. "Give him a hand up," someone called, not realizing he couldn't take it. "Classic Everett," another voice chuckled. "Always the entertainer." A tear slid sideways across his temple, tracing a path he couldn't wipe away. The party sounds warped and echoed as shock deepened. Perfume and aftershave became nauseating as laughing guests bent over him. The cake's candles still flickered on the table, 70 flames marking a celebration turned nightmare. From the corner of his vision, he spotted Eleanor's orthopedic shoes. Unlike the others, she hadn't approached but wasn't retreating either. Her eyes held a knowing sadness. "Dad's really selling this one," someone joked, and Everett realized his son Daniel had arrived, standing awkwardly near the door. Jamie's face suddenly appeared in his line of sight, her initial smile fading as professional assessment took over. She knelt beside him, fingers gently checking his pulse. "Mr. Collins, can you move your fingers for me?" she asked quietly. Nothing responded to his desperate mental commands. "He's just being dramatic," Tracy said, squeezing his shoulder with painful pressure. "Everett, that's enough now." Jamie's expression hardened as she checked his pupils. "This isn't right," she whispered. Then louder, "Everyone step back, please." "I need space." The laughter faltered, replaced by uncomfortable murmurs. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Tracy sighed. "He always does this for attention." Everett caught Brent's face briefly showing satisfaction before adopting concerned brother-in-law expression. Their eyes met, and Brent's held no surprise at the outcome of his prank. "He needs an ambulance immediately," Jamie announced firmly. "This is a serious spinal injury. Nobody move him." Silence fell across the room as reality sank in. "But it was just a little stumble," Tracy protested, her rehearsed concern slipping. "He falls all the time." Jamie leaned closer while preparing a makeshift neck stabilizer from rolled-up towels. "This presentation is inconsistent with an accidental fall," she whispered, just loud enough for Everett to hear. "Something's very wrong here." Another tear escaped as Everett realized someone finally saw the truth. But at what terrible cost to his independence, his dignity, his future? The birthday celebration continued to surround him, but he was already entering a different, darker world of complete vulnerability. Paramedics arrived with practiced efficiency, their faces growing serious as Jamie briefed them in medical shorthand. They transferred Everett to a stretcher with meticulous spinal precautions, every movement deliberate and controlled. The party decorations looked garish now, the cheer of birthday celebration an obscene contrast to the cervical collar around his neck. "I'm riding with him," Tracy announced, not asked. her handbag clutched like a shield as she climbed into the ambulance. "I'm his wife." Everett wanted to scream when she said those words. 42 years of marriage now felt like a prison sentence. His body remained traitorously silent, refusing all commands to move, to speak, to warn the medics about the woman sitting beside him. Only his eyes could communicate, darting desperately to the young paramedic monitoring his vitals. The ambulance's antiseptic smell mixed with Tracy's perfume, triggering waves of nausea he couldn't express. The siren wailed above, marking each second of his vulnerability with shrill urgency. "He's always been clumsy," Tracy explained to the ER doctor, a middle-aged woman whose name tag read Dr. Reynolds. "Accidents waiting to happen. I can't take my eyes off him for a minute." The doctor's expression shifted subtly as she examined Everett and compared his injury to Tracy's explanation. "The mechanism of injury seems inconsistent with a simple fall during a dance move," she noted, making entries in his chart. "Well, he's 70 today. Brittle bones, you know." Tracy laughed lightly. "And he was probably overexcited. He gets confused easily these days." A young nurse caught Everett's eye as Tracy spoke, noticing the tear sliding down his temple. She dabbed it away with a tissue, her touch gentle. Something in her expression suggested she'd seen this before. "Mrs. Collins, could you please wait outside while we run some tests?" Dr. Reynolds requested, her tone professional but firm. "But I'm his healthcare proxy." "Standard procedure. The waiting room is just down the hall. Someone will update you shortly." The thin privacy curtain didn't block Tracy's voice as she made phone calls in the hallway. "Yes, another fall. No, I've been telling him to be careful. Early dementia, I suspect." When Tracy was safely out of earshot, Dr. Reynolds leaned closer to Everett. "Mr. Collins, I'm going to ask you some questions. Blink once for yes, twice for no. Do you understand?" One deliberate blink. "Are you in pain right now?" One blink. "Can you feel this?" She touched his hand. Two blinks. Tears welled again. The hospital clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed. A muffled announcement called for a doctor in another department. The monitor tracking Everett's vital signs beeped with increasing frequency. "Mr. Collins, Doctor," Reynolds said quietly. Was this truly an accident? Two slow, deliberate blinks. The doctor exchanged a glance with the nurse before continuing. "I'm ordering comprehensive scans. There's something about your injury that concerns me." A commotion outside interrupted them, Eleanor's voice rising above Tracy's attempts to quiet her. "The stairs last month weren't an accident either. I saw what happened." "Mother is confused today," Tracy's voice smoothed over. "She has dementia. Don't upset yourself." Dr. Reynolds stepped outside briefly, then returned with a trauma specialist. They spoke in hushed tones, looking at the preliminary x-rays. "Mr. Collins," the trauma specialist said after examining him, "we're seeing some unusual patterns here. I'm ordering an MRI immediately." As they wheeled him toward radiology, Everett caught sight of Daniel arriving, his son's face a mask of concern and confusion as Tracy pulled him aside, already shaping the narrative. The doctor closed the privacy curtain around Everett's bed when they returned, leaning close so only he could hear. "Mr. Collins, these injuries show a pattern consistent with repeated trauma. How long has this been happening? Blink once for yes, twice for no." One slow blink released another tear. Someone finally saw the truth. The MRI machine hummed around Everett, its rhythmic thumping marking each second of revelation. Through the small mirror angled above his face, he watched the technician's expression shift from routine professionalism to disturbed concern. She whispered something to her supervisor, who studied the monitor with growing intensity before reaching for the phone. "We need Dr. Chen, immediately." Everett had seen that look before, in his own mirror during 40 years as a physical therapist. the look that said something was very wrong, something that couldn't be explained away. Later, in a sterile consultation room with muted blues and grays, neurologist Dr. Chen rotated the screen toward Everett, now propped up in bed with limited mobility returning to his upper body. The blue-white glow of medical imaging showed not just his fresh injury, but a constellation of healed fractures in his spine, ribs, and wrists. "Mr. Collins," she said gently, "these fractures have distinct patterns inconsistent with accidental falls. The new injury shows clear directional force application. But these older injuries," she pointed to white lines on the dark scan, "they tell a different story altogether, one that spans years." Everett's fingers trembled as he traced each ghostly white line on the screen. "March," he whispered, voice rasping with effort. "Kitchen fall," Tracy said. "Slippery floor." Dr. Chen nodded, making notes. "November. Stairs." His voice strengthened slightly. "Brent," said, "helped me. I tripped." "And this one?" "Doctor." Chen indicated a partially healed fracture. "Last month. Birthday. Planning." Tears formed. "Brent showed me garden. Push. Tracy told neighbors. Dizzy spell." A patient advocate had joined them, quietly documenting each word. "Mr. Collins, we've initiated our elder abuse protocol. You're safe now. Mrs. Collins will not be permitted in your room without supervision." The door opened as a social worker entered. "The police have been notified," she explained. "They'll want to interview you when you're stronger. In the meantime, Mrs. Collins has been directed to the waiting area." The hospital bed's raised rails now represented protection rather than limitation. The manila folder containing abuse protocol paperwork sat on the bedside table, giving official form to his private nightmare. On the patient whiteboard, someone had crossed out fall and written trauma. "Dad?" Daniel stood in the doorway, confusion evident as staff treated his mother with professional distance. At 35, he looked like Everett had decades ago, except for Tracy's eyes now clouded with uncertainty. "What's happening?" "Mom says there's been a mistake with your scans." Dr. Chen introduced herself. "Mr. Collins, I'm your father's neurologist. Perhaps we could speak privately." Before Daniel could respond, Tracy appeared behind him, her professional smile freezing when the social worker stepped forward. "Mrs. Collins, as I explained, you'll need to remain in the waiting area while we complete your husband's assessment." "This is ridiculous. I'm his wife. He needs me." Tracy's voice held the perfect note of concerned spouse. "He gets confused, especially with medication. Whatever he's saying, we haven't asked him anything yet, Mrs. Collins," Dr. Chen interrupted calmly. "And the scans speak for themselves." "I have healthcare power of attorney," Tracy insisted, opening her purse to retrieve documents. "Everett has early onset dementia. It's not officially diagnosed yet, but—" "That's not true." Everett's voice was weak but clear. "Never diagnosed. Never confused." Daniel looked between his parents, witnessing his mother's mask slip for the first time as cold anger flashed across her features before smoothing into concern. "See what I mean? He's not himself. Daniel, tell them." But Daniel had moved to the computer screen where Dr. Chen had displayed the scans, his medical training from college biology allowing him to recognize the obvious abnormalities. "Mom, what are all these old fractures? Dad's had this many falls." "Your father has always been clumsy. You know that." Tracy's voice hardened slightly. "Daniel, don't let them manipulate you with medical jargon you don't understand." The social worker stepped forward. "Mrs. Collins, we've also found some concerning financial transactions connected to your husband's injuries. Has anyone recently changed his insurance policy?" Tracy's smile disappeared completely. "I want a lawyer." Everett watched his son's expression transform as reality began to crack through decades of his mother's careful narrative. The weight of truth hung heavy in the room, terrible but somehow freeing. "I'd like to speak to my father alone," Daniel said finally, "without either of you present." When everyone had left, Daniel pulled the visitor's chair close to the bed. "Dad, what's really been happening?" Everett looked into his son's eyes, Tracy's eyes, but filled with dawning horror rather than calculation, and began to tell the truth that had been silenced for years. "I'm afraid we may not have enough," Detective Malone said, closing his notebook with an apologetic sigh. "Without more evidence, it's your word against theirs." Everett sat in his hospital room, now feeling like both sanctuary and prison. Through the window, he could see life continuing outside, people walking dogs, visitors carrying flowers, medical staff changing shifts. His own life hung suspended between revelation and resolution, trapped in the limbo of partial justice. But the scans, his voice, stronger after days of therapy, still cracked with frustration. Dr. Chen said the pattern was clear. "Medical evidence shows you've been injured, yes, but proving who caused those injuries and that they were deliberate, that's the challenge." Malone's weathered face showed genuine regret. "Your wife has provided explanations for each incident, supported by medical records she's managed for years. She controlled everything." Everett's hands twisted in the blanket covering his legs that still responded only to the most basic commands. "The doctors, the records. She's a nurse. People trust her. And your mother-in-law's statement about witnessing the incident on the stairs. Eleanor saw everything." Hope flickered briefly. Mrs. Harrington became confused during formal questioning. She contradicted herself several times. Malone glanced at his notes. One minute she was describing an incident on the stairs, the next she was talking about a garden accident from 20 years ago. A fresh wave of despair washed over Everett. They've been calling her confused whenever she says something they don't like. That's how they've silenced her. "I believe you," Malone said quietly, "but belief isn't evidence." Meanwhile, Daniel stood in the attic of the family home, surrounded by dust and memories. Tracy was at the hospital, continuing her campaign to regain control of Everett's care. She didn't know Daniel had used his spare key to search for anything that might help his father. His hands trembled as he opened a battered photo album hidden behind Christmas decorations. Inside were fishing trips, graduation ceremonies, birthdays, images contradicting his mother's claims of his father's lifelong neglect and instability. On the back of each photo, his father's neat handwriting noted dates and occasions. Daniel checked these dates against the medical records he'd requested from his father's former doctor, records from before his mother had taken control of all healthcare decisions. The accident, dates aligned perfectly with family gatherings where Brent had been present. Across town, Tracy sat with the hospital's administration officer, her voice controlled but insistent. "My husband is not in his right mind. These accusations are symptoms of his cognitive decline. I've been trying to get him proper care for months, but he refuses to admit anything's wrong." "Mrs. Collins, Dr. Chen's report indicates no signs of cognitive impairment. She's not a geriatric specialist." Tracy's smile remained fixed. "I've arranged for a second opinion from Dr. Patterson." "Dr. Patterson is a colleague of your brother's, correct?" Tracy's smile faltered slightly. "He's the best in his field." Back in his apartment that evening, Daniel spread the evidence across his coffee table. Photographs contradicting his mother's narrative, medical records showing a suspicious pattern, and financial documents revealing insurance policy changes before each major accident. His phone rang, Detective Malone returning his call. "I found something," Daniel said without preamble. Financial records showing large withdrawals after each of Dad's accidents, and an insurance policy on him that was increased last month, right before his birthday. Both Mom and Uncle Brent are beneficiaries. "That helps," Malone acknowledged. But we still need more. Your grandmother's testimony would be crucial if she could remain consistent. Eleanor has moments of perfect clarity. I've seen it. Daniel hesitated. Let me talk to her alone, without Mom hovering. At the care facility where Eleanor now stayed temporarily, Daniel sat beside her as she knitted with practiced movements. Grandma, do you remember what happened to Dad on the stairs last month? Eleanor's needles stilled. Brent pushed him. Tracy watched. Her voice was suddenly crystal clear. Not the first time. Could you tell the police that? Confusion clouded her features. Police? Has someone been hurt? Daniel's heart sank as her lucidity vanished, just as the detective had described. Back at the hospital, Everett received the devastating call. The case might not proceed due to insufficient evidence. His testimony was being undermined by Tracy's campaign portraying him as mentally unstable. Community organizations were receiving calls about poor Tracy dealing with her husband's delusions. As the phone dropped to his lap, Everett turned his face to the wall, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. After everything, the pain, the humiliation, the betrayal, they might still escape consequences. They might still win. Has betrayal left you feeling voiceless? Share your story below. Like if this resonates with your experience, follow to see if Everett finds his voice again. Can truth overcome when the deck is stacked against you? Daniel sat at his dining table surrounded by evidence that told a story few would believe. Financial records spread across the wooden surface showed suspicious withdrawals after each of his father's accidents. His laptop displayed an insurance policy on Everett that had been increased just weeks before the birthday prank, with Tracy and Brent as sole beneficiaries. Coffee cups with stained rings marked hours of investigation, takeout containers piled in the trash. 3 broken vertebrae equals $20,000, he muttered, connecting dates of hospital admissions to bank transactions. Every single time, they profited from his pain. The pattern was undeniable, but Detective Malone's words haunted him. They needed more. Something concrete that directly tied his mother and uncle to deliberate harm. Meanwhile, Everett gripped the parallel bars in the physical therapy room, sweat beading on his forehead as he attempted to bear weight on legs that responded with agonizing slowness to his commands. That's it, Mr. Collins, his therapist Jessica encouraged. Small victories. His arms trembled with effort, but determination burned brighter than pain. Each small movement represented more than physical recovery. It was reclamation of agency stolen from him for years. Tracy said, he managed between labored breaths, I'd never walk again. Jessica made notes on her clipboard. Medical science makes no such absolutes, Mr. Collins, and you've got something stronger than science on your side. What's that? Pure stubbornness. She smiled. Same time tomorrow? Tears mixed with sweat as Everett nodded. For the first time in years, someone believed in his strength rather than exploiting his vulnerability. That afternoon, Daniel visited the care facility where Eleanor now resided. Unlike the family home where she'd lived as a convenient witness to be discredited, her new room was bright and personalized, though she seemed disoriented by the change. Hello, Grandma, Daniel said gently. Eleanor looked up from her knitting basket. Tracy's boy, she said, recognition flickering. You have her eyes. I need your help, Grandma. About Dad, about Everett. Confusion clouded her features. Is it Tuesday? They serve pudding on Tuesdays. Daniel's hope faded. Just as Detective Malone had warned, her testimony would crumble under questioning. He rose to leave when Eleanor's hand suddenly gripped his wrist with surprising strength. Wait! Her eyes cleared with startling lucidity. She glanced toward the door, then leaned closer. They think I don't see, but I do. What do you see, Grandma? Instead of answering, Eleanor slowly extracted a worn notebook from beneath her yarn, movements deliberate and secretive. Paper remembers what people forget, she whispered. Daniel accepted the tattered notebook with trembling fingers. Inside, in his grandmother's shaky handwriting, were dated entries spanning years. Detailed accounts of accidents, orchestrated by Brent with Tracy's knowledge. Conversations overheard when they thought Eleanor was sleeping or confused. Financial discussions about insurance policies. You wrote all this down? Eleanor nodded, momentary clarity illuminating her features. They thought old means stupid, but I know what I saw. She tapped the notebook. All in there, every time. Daniel carefully photographed each fragile page with his phone before returning the diary to Eleanor's knitting basket. This is important, Grandma. Very important. I know. Her lucidity was already fading. Is it Tuesday? They serve pudding on Tuesdays. That evening, Daniel connected Eleanor's diary entries to medical records and financial transactions, creating a comprehensive timeline of abuse. The precision of her dates, even during periods when she seemed most confused, aligned perfectly with hospital visits and bank withdrawals. He forwarded everything to Detective Malone with a simple message. I think we have enough now. Meanwhile, Dr. Chen completed her comprehensive analysis, identifying the unmistakable pattern of deliberate injuries in Everett's scans. Her report, clinical in language but devastating in content, detailed how the fracture patterns indicated applied force rather than accidental falls. Most damning was her conclusion that Everett's latest injury showed evidence of precise application of pressure to vertebrae already weakened by previous trauma, knowledge that would require medical understanding. Your brother was in medical school for 2 years before dropping out, correct? Detective Malone asked Tracy during a follow-up interview. The question seemed casual, but her sudden pallor revealed its impact. That was decades ago, she replied carefully. He barely remembers any of it. Interesting, because the injury pattern suggests knowledge of spinal vulnerabilities consistent with medical training. Later that day, Everett received an unexpected call in his hospital room. Mr. Collins, Detective Malone here. I wanted you to know we're reopening your case with renewed focus. What changed? Let's just say we've received compelling new evidence. Your son and mother-in-law have been quite helpful. For the first time since his birthday, Everett felt something beyond pain and betrayal, a spark of hope that truth might actually prevail. The tears that flowed now were different from the helpless frustration of before. These were tears of vindication after years of silent suffering. This changes everything, Malone continued. We have a solid case now. I'll be in touch soon to discuss next steps. After hanging up, Everett watched the sunset through his hospital window. The world outside continued its normal rhythms, unaware that inside this room, a man once silenced was finding his voice again. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, it felt winnable. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Everett's trembling hand steadied as he placed it on the Bible, his voice finding strength despite the wheelchair that now defined his public image. The deposition room's stark functionality, recording equipment, water pitcher, legal pads, seemed to shrink around the weight of truths finally spoken aloud. His testimony unfolded in careful detail. Each accident, each dismissal, each moment of clarity when he recognized the pattern but couldn't prove it. The court reporter's fingers flew across her stenotype machine, transforming decades of silent suffering into official record. Mr. Collins, the prosecutor Martin Reeves asked, when did you first suspect these weren't accidents? 3 years ago, after the fall from the garden shed. Everett's eyes held steady. Brent insisted on helping me down the ladder. I felt his hands push rather than support. Tracy was watching from the kitchen window. Across town, Brent sat before his work computer as digital forensics experts documented his search history. Spinal injuries without visible trauma, insurance payout spouse death, Paralysis from fall. His carefully constructed facade of concerned brother-in-law crumbled under the weight of premeditation now exposed. "We have enough for attempted murder charges," Detective Malone informed Everett after the deposition. "The planning, the financial motive, the medical knowledge applied to cause maximum harm, it's all there." Everett wheeled himself to the rehabilitation center garden, processing what justice might actually look like. The flowering trees he wouldn't have lived to see if Brent's ultimate plan had succeeded provided shade from the afternoon sun. "Dad?" Daniel stood nearby, hesitant after their years of strained relationship. "The prosecutor says it's solid." "They won't escape this." "Your mother will try," Everett replied, a lifetime of knowing Tracy's determination behind the simple statement. As if summoned by his words, Tracy appeared at the garden entrance the following day, makeup perfectly applied, eyes reddened just enough to suggest tears without compromising her appearance. "Everett." Her voice carried practiced vulnerability as she approached his wheelchair. "We need to talk, privately." The nurse assigned to monitor all visits looked to Everett for guidance. "She can stay," he said, indicating the nurse. "I have nothing to hide." Tracy's smile tightened. "This has gone too far. These accusations, what will people think? After 42 years of marriage, how can you do this to your family? You stopped being family when you helped Brent try to kill me." "That's absurd. It was a birthday prank gone wrong. Brent feels terrible. Terrible enough to research paralysis techniques, to increase my life insurance. To practice on me for years before the final attempt?" Each question landed like a physical blow. "I saw the evidence, Tracy. All of it." Something cold flickered behind her tears. "You can't prove intent." Eleanor's diary, financial records, Brent's search history, your contradicting statements to medical staff. Everett's voice strengthened with each piece of evidence. "But most damning, the birthday card with the X in the corner, your signal that it was happening that day. I kept it." Tracy's performance crumbled, calculation replacing grief. "Nobody will believe a confused old man and a dementia patient over a respected nurse." "They already do." The following week, Daniel helped Everett move into an accessible apartment, a space free from memories of betrayal. Adaptive equipment represented both limitation and new independence as they arranged furniture to accommodate his wheelchair. "Brent tried to visit Eleanor yesterday," Daniel mentioned as they unpacked. "Security escorted him out." Everett nodded, unsurprised by the desperation of a man facing serious charges. "He's always underestimated her, just like he underestimated me." The final pre-trial meeting with the prosecution team confirmed what they already knew. The case against both Tracy and Brent was overwhelming. Evidence of Brent's research into spinal injuries, financial records showing clear motive, medical analysis proving deliberate harm, and Eleanor's detailed diary had created an airtight case. "Your testimony will be crucial," Martin Reeves explained. "Juries respond to the human element behind the evidence." Everett looked at the case files spread across the conference table, his life's pain reduced to exhibits and testimony. "I will speak for myself," he said, "and for those who cannot. Standing up to abusers takes unimaginable courage. Comment with A if you're supporting Everett's fight for justice. Like if you believe truth eventually prevails, follow to witness the final confrontation. Will his voice finally be heard in court? The courthouse stood like a monument to order amidst chaos, imposing marble columns, echoing hallways, rooms where truth was sifted from deception by human judgment. Everett's wheelchair required special accommodation to navigate the historic building, a courthouse aide guiding him through service entrances and freight elevators. The journey itself, a reminder of how systems designed for the able-bodied often rendered the disabled invisible. Inside the courtroom, wooden benches filled quickly. Medical staff who had identified the abuse pattern sat in a tight cluster, Dr. Chen, the young ER nurse, Jamie in her off-duty clothes. Several elderly observers who'd followed the case in local news occupied the front row, their presence suggesting this story had touched something universal in their generation's experience. Daniel sat directly behind the prosecution table, Eleanor beside him in one of her increasingly frequent moments of clarity, her gnarled hands clutching her purse containing the original diary that had broken the case open. "All rise," the bailiff called as Judge Harriet Monroe entered, her stern features betraying nothing of her thoughts on the case that had captured community attention. Tracy and Brent sat at separate defense tables, their lawyers having successfully argued that their interests might conflict. Tracy wore a subdued navy dress that suggested respectability without flashiness, her hair pulled back in a maternal style that softened her features. Brent's expensive suit and carefully concerned expression completed the picture of upstanding citizens wrongfully accused. Everett watched them from his position near the prosecutor's table, seeing through the costumes to the calculated cruelty beneath. His hands rested calmly on the wheelchair arms, the tremors of anxiety controlled by something stronger, the determination to speak truth in a room designed for it. Prosecutor Martin Reeves approached the jury with measured steps, his opening statement free of theatrics but devastating in its clarity. "This case is about betrayal in its most fundamental form," he began, gesturing toward Everett. For years, Everett Collins suffered what appeared to be a series of unfortunate accidents, falls, mishaps, incidents dismissed as the natural consequence of aging. What we will prove beyond reasonable doubt is that these were not accidents, but calculated acts of violence perpetrated by the two people Mr. Collins should have been able to trust most, his wife Tracy Collins and her brother Brent Harrington. The methodical presentation of evidence began with medical testimony. Dr. Chen explained to the jury how Everett's injury patterns showed deliberate application of force rather than accidental falls, her pointer identifying healed fractures on enlarged scans projected on screens visible to the entire courtroom. These injuries, she concluded, required knowledge of human anatomy and considerable force applied with precision. Financial records established motive. Insurance policies increased before major injuries, withdrawals following hospital stays, a pattern so clear it needed little interpretation. The digital forensics expert testified about Brent's damning search history, reading aloud queries that revealed premeditation, undetectable ways to cause paralysis, how long after injury to collect insurance. When Eleanor took the stand, the defense attorneys practically salivated, expecting confused testimony they could easily discredit. Instead, they encountered a woman whose mind, while sometimes clouded, held islands of perfect recall, particularly regarding the incidents detailed in her diary. "May 14th, last year," she stated firmly when asked about a specific entry. "Brent visited for Sunday dinner. Everett was checking the furnace. I saw Brent follow him to the basement. There was a crash. Tracy didn't seem surprised when Brent called up that Everett had fallen." Under cross-examination, Eleanor occasionally drifted, but when presented with her diary entries, her clarity returned with remarkable consistency. "Paper remembers what people forget," she repeated, the simple phrase more powerful than rehearsed testimony. The most dramatic moment came when Brent's text messages to Tracy were displayed on the courtroom screen. "Need to make this one count. Spine, not skull this time. Insurance cleared yesterday." A collective intake of breath from the gallery accompanied the evidence. Brent's confident smile collapsed, his attorney's objections overruled as the prosecutor established the message's authenticity. When Everett's turn came to testify, an aide helped him to the witness stand. From this elevated position, he could see the entire courtroom, the jury's attentive faces, the reporters taking notes, the community members who had come to witness justice in action. "Mr. Collins," Reeves began, "please tell the court about your birthday party last month." Everett's voice remained steady as he recounted the careful positioning, the precise shove, the laughter as he lay paralyzed. He described the pattern of previous injuries, the growing awareness that they were deliberate, the isolation of not being believed. "I speak not just for myself," he concluded, looking directly at the jury, "but for others who suffer in silence, afraid no one will believe them against those who present a perfect face to the world while inflicting private pain." Tracy's testimony unraveled under cross-examination when confronted with her contradictory statements to medical staff over the years. Her careful narrative of being a devoted caregiver to an accident-prone husband collapsed when presented with financial records showing her systematic exploitation of each injury. "You testified earlier that you increased the insurance policy on your husband's life because of your deep concern for his well-being," Reeves pressed. "Yet you made no improvements to your home to prevent these supposed accidents. No grab bars, no non-slip surfaces, no safety modifications of any kind." "Why is that, Mrs. Collins?" Her rehearsed response about finances rang hollow against evidence of luxury purchases made days after insurance payouts. The jury deliberated for just 3 hours before returning. The courtroom fell silent as the verdict was read. On the charge of aggravated assault with intent to cause grievous bodily harm, we find the defendant, Brent Harrington, guilty. Brent's face drained of color as the reality of consequences finally reached him. "The defendant will be remanded into custody pending sentencing," Judge Monroe announced, then addressed the prosecutor. "Regarding charges against Tracy Collins, the state is proceeding with charges of conspiracy and accessory to assault, Your Honor. We're also investigating financial crimes related to insurance fraud." As the courtroom erupted in reaction, Daniel's hand found Everett's shoulder. Through tears of vindication, Everett watched Tracy being led away to arrange bail, her carefully constructed world crumbling behind her perfect makeup. Judge Monroe's final words resonated through the wood-paneled room. "The court wishes to acknowledge the courage of Mr. Collins and Mrs. Harrington in bringing this matter to light. Elder abuse thrives in silence and shame. Today, that silence has been broken." For the first time in years, Everett felt the weight of unacknowledged truth lift from his shoulders. The road ahead, both physical recovery and emotional healing, remained challenging, but no longer would it be traveled in the shadow of denied reality. 3 months after the verdict, Everett maneuvered his walker through the door of his adapted apartment, returning from physical therapy. Each halting step represented both limitation and triumph. He would never again navigate the world with the ease he once knew, but he moved through it on his own terms now, reclaiming independence inch by painful inch. The apartment bore little resemblance to the family home where decades of manipulation had unfolded. No antiques selected by Tracy for appearance rather than comfort. No precisely arranged furniture optimized for photography rather than living. Instead, accessible modifications blended seamlessly with personal choices, photographs he had selected, books within easy reach, a comfortable recliner positioned to catch morning light for reading. Everett lowered himself carefully into this chair, muscles aching from today's therapy session. Jessica, his physical therapist, had pushed him harder than usual, celebrating each small victory with genuine enthusiasm, rather than Tracy's performative praise that had always contained undercurrents of disappointment. "You've gained another 5 degrees of motion," Jessica had noted, updating his chart. "Remarkable progress for spinal trauma at your age." Age. Once a weapon used against him, now simply a factor to consider in recovery. The distinction made all the difference. The local newspaper lay folded on his side table, yesterday's headline still visible. Collins case sparks Elder Abuse Task Force. The article detailed how his testimony had prompted the county to establish new protocols for identifying and addressing elder abuse, with special training for medical professionals and first responders. Dr. Chen had been appointed to lead the medical education component. His phone rang, Daniel calling with their now daily check-in. "How was therapy?" his son asked, the background noise suggesting he was at the courthouse. Brutal, Everett replied with a small smile. Jessica's determined to see me walk unassisted by Christmas. That's only 2 months away. She says I'm stubborn enough to manage it. A companionable silence followed, the kind they were still learning to navigate after years of Tracy's interference in their relationship. Daniel had discovered journals from his childhood where Tracy had systematically rewritten history, presenting Everett's attempts to connect with his son as negligence or instability. The prosecutor called, Daniel said finally. Mom's taking a plea deal, 20 years with possibility of parole after 12. They had enough for a longer sentence, but this spares everyone a second trial. Everett absorbed this information, feeling neither joy nor sorrow, only a muted relief that justice had found its form. Brent had already begun his 30-year sentence, the judge citing the premeditated nature of his crimes and lack of remorse as factors in the severe penalty. "How's Eleanor today?" Everett asked, changing the subject. "Good day so far. The new medication seems to help with the confusion. The facility says she's been asking for you. I'll visit tomorrow. My morning appointment was canceled." After hanging up, Everett wheeled himself to the small desk by the window where his journal waited. The therapist had suggested writing as a way to process trauma, but it had become something more, a record for others who might recognize their own experiences in his words. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the garden visible from his window. He had planted perennials with Daniel last weekend, flowers that would return year after year, outlasting winter's dormancy, just as he had outlasted years of hidden abuse. An envelope on his desk caught his attention, the weekly correspondence from Martin Reeves, now running for district attorney on a platform that included stronger elder protection laws. Inside was a newspaper clipping about a woman who had left her abusive situation after hearing Everett's testimony. "You'll never know how many lives you've saved by speaking up," Martin had written in the margin. "Mine is just one of them." Everett traced the words with fingers that no longer trembled quite so badly. The knowledge that his pain had created safety for others transformed what could have been merely personal justice into something more meaningful, a legacy beyond the scars he carried. The invitation to speak at next week's support group meeting lay beside the clipping. The community center had reached out after the trial, asking if he would share his experience with other survivors. His first instinct had been to decline. Public speaking had never been his strength. But the thought of others sitting in silent suffering as he had for years changed his mind. Later that evening, Eleanor arrived for dinner, accompanied by her care facility aide. Her cognitive clarity had been increasing with proper medical attention, another victim of Tracy's systematic gaslighting now receiving appropriate care. Though dementia still claimed parts of her mind, the diagnosis had been modified to reflect that many of her symptoms had been deliberately induced by isolation and medication manipulation. "You look strong," she noted as they shared a meal Daniel had prepared before leaving for an evening meeting. "Getting there," Everett acknowledged. "I knew you would." Eleanor's eyes held the wisdom of her 88 years. "Paper remembers, but so do people, eventually." After Eleanor returned to her facility, Everett continued work on his speech for the support group. Finding words for experiences long hidden presented challenges, but each sentence brought greater clarity, transforming private suffering into communal understanding. The following week, he stood before the support group using his walker, tears glistening but voice strong as he addressed the circle of chairs arranged for maximum accessibility. Faces of various ages looked back at him, each carrying their own stories of vulnerability and resilience. "Survival itself is strength," he began, the words coming easier than expected. "Speaking is victory." As his story unfolded, the gradual recognition of abuse, the struggle to be believed, the path to justice, he watched recognition dawn in several expressions. One elderly woman dabbed at tears, another nodded with grim understanding. A middle-aged man stared at his hands as if seeing them anew. When Everett finished speaking, the group coordinator asked if anyone had questions. The elderly woman who had been crying raised her hand. "How did you find the courage?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Everett considered this, looking at the scars on his hands, visible reminders of invisible wounds. "I realized my silence protected them," he answered finally, "and my voice might protect someone else." Later, writing in his journal, Everett reflected on how tragedy had ultimately given him purpose. The path forward remained challenging: physical limitations, legal proceedings against Tracy, rebuilding fractured relationships, but no longer would it be traveled alone or in silence. On his calendar hung on the wall, speaking engagements were penciled in alongside therapy appointments. The Christmas date circled in red represented Jessica's challenge: walking unassisted by December. Whether he achieved that specific goal mattered less than the direction of the journey. Outside his window, the perennials were preparing for winter dormancy, storing strength in their roots for spring's renewal. Everett understood this cycle now more intimately than ever: the gathering of resilience in darkness, the patient waiting, the inevitable return to light. 3 months after the verdict, Everett guided his walker through the autumn garden of his new accessible apartment complex. Each step required concentration, the damaged nerves in his spine sending mixed signals to reluctant muscles. But every movement was his own, claimed back from those who had tried to take everything. The garden's perennials were preparing for winter dormancy, storing strength in their roots for spring's renewal. Everett understood this cycle now more intimately than ever: the gathering of resilience in darkness, the patient waiting, the inevitable return to light. "You're pushing yourself too hard," Daniel observed, walking alongside him. "Jessica says I'm right on schedule," Everett countered, naming his physical therapist who had become both taskmaster and cheerleader in his recovery journey. She also said to use the wheelchair for distances over 50 feet. Everett smiled but continued with the walker. Small rebellions against limitation had become part of his healing. They reached a bench positioned to catch the afternoon sun. Daniel helped his father settle, then sat beside him. "Mom took the plea deal," Daniel said quietly. 20 years with possibility of parole after 12. Everett nodded, feeling neither vindication nor sorrow, only a muted relief that this chapter was closing. Brent had already begun his 30-year sentence, the judge citing the premeditated nature of his crimes and lack of remorse. "And Eleanor? Good day today. The new medication helps. She's been asking when you'll visit again." The local newspaper lay folded on the bench between them, yesterday's headline still visible: "Collins case sparks elder abuse task force." The article detailed how his testimony had prompted the county to establish new protocols for identifying and addressing elder abuse. "You've made a difference," Daniel said, following his father's gaze to the headline. "That's something. It's everything," Everett corrected gently. Later that evening, Everett prepared for the support group meeting at the community center. The invitation to speak had arrived weeks ago, and despite initial hesitation, public speaking had never been his strength, he had accepted. The thought of others sitting in silent suffering, as he had for years, had made the decision simple. Using his walker, he entered the community center where chairs had been arranged in a circle. Faces of various ages looked up as he made his way to the speaker's position, each person carrying their own story of vulnerability and resilience. "Survival itself is strength," he began, his voice steadier than expected. "Speaking is victory." As his story unfolded, the gradual recognition of abuse, the struggle to be believed, the path to justice, he watched recognition dawn in several expressions. One elderly woman dabbed at tears, another nodded with grim understanding. A middle-aged man stared at his hands as if seeing them anew. When he finished, the elderly woman who had been crying raised her hand. "How did you find the courage?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Everett considered this, looking at the scars on his hands, visible reminders of invisible wounds. I realized my silence protected them, he answered finally, and my voice might protect someone else. The following week, a letter arrived from a stranger. After hearing your story, I left my son's home where he had been controlling my medication and finances. I am safe now. You'll never know how many lives you've saved by speaking up. Mine is just one of them. Everett placed this letter in a growing file of similar messages, each representing someone who had found their own voice through his. The physical pain remained a daily companion, but it no longer defined his existence. On his calendar hung by the desk, speaking engagements were penciled in alongside therapy appointments. The Christmas date circled in red represented Jessica's challenge, walking unassisted by December. Whether he achieved that specific goal mattered less than the direction of the journey. That evening, as sunset painted his small patio in golden light, Everett wrote in his journal, "Silence protected them. Speaking saved me. Perhaps it will save someone else, too." He closed the book, set down his pen, and turned his face toward the fading light, scarred but undefeated, his voice finally his own.